Okay. USA country mapping.
The flag of the United States of America has 50 stars for the 50 states, 13 stripes for the 13 original colonies, and red, white, and blue colors to represent strength, purity, and justice. Here we have shown you a map of the United States with each state and capital labeled individually. A brief history of the United States is that it was first colonized by England in the 1600s. The Declaration of Independence was signed July 4th, 1776, which is what we now celebrate as the 4th of July. The Constitution was signed in 1787 and is when the United States was actually founded. The Civil War and Reconstruction period after the Civil War was from 1861 to 1877. The Industrial Revolution followed in the late 19th century. And the Progressive Era, Great Depression, World War II was in the early 20th century. And Civil Rights Era, the moon landing, and the invention of the internet were some key points of the later 20th century. The geography of the United States is very diverse. It's generally a very temperate climate, but it varies drastically by region. Typically, the United States can be broken down into 5 regions, which is the Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, Southwest, and West, which we've shown in a picture here. And there are lots of different climates depending on the region. Deciduous forests are what make up the Northeast, typically like the New England area or Amherst area, where UMass is. But there are also deserts, rainforests, prairies and grasslands, mountains, beaches, and in Hawaii, there are tropics and Arctic landscapes in Alaska. And here we have some pictures of what those different landscapes look like, depending on where you are in the United States. The demographics of the United States of America are that the population is about 328 million as of 2019. The population is 76.3% white. The second largest population is Hispanic or Latino at 18.5%. We have all of the breakdowns of different racial groups in this slide. And the median household income is about $62,000 a year. Food varies a lot in the United States because there is a lot of diversity and a lot of different ethnicities and cultures that live here. But typically, traditional American foods are things like apple pies, hamburgers, clam chowder, deep dish pizza, and barbecue. Again, the culture of the United States is also it varies very greatly just because there are so many different kinds of people that live here. But some commonly shared values are individualism, freedom, justice and equality, patriotism, democracy, free speech, and a strong work ethic. But it does vary very widely. There is no official language for the United States. English is the most widely spoken, but it's not the official language. The 5 most common languages that are spoken are English, Spanish, Chinese, Tagalog, and Vietnamese. In terms of music, there's also lots of different music that comes from the United States. The most popular artists right now are Drake, Olivia Rodrigo, Doja Cat, Taylor Swift, and Lil Baby. But some more classic American artists are Aretha Franklin, Dolly Parton, Johnny Cash, Bruce Springsteen, and Michael Jackson. We also have a picture here of some of the most popular music genres with rock, R&B, and alternative at the top. In terms of people, we touched on this a little bit already. The population is about 328 million, and the United States is typically referred to as a melting pot of different cultures and different people because there are a lot of people who immigrate to the United States from all different places. So typically, it's just very common to have lots of places like Little Italy or Chinatown or different a lot of people from different cultures all living together. And that's one of the great things about the United States.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about the U.S. Relations with other countries. So many countries resent the U.S. because they think we act like an empire and we impose our will on other countries without their consent. And that being said, there are instances of U.S. intervention that are generally seen in a good light. One of these would be the Marshall Plan, which was a US program providing aid to Western Europe following the devastation of World War II. In other instances, the US will try to keep peace in volatile regions by sending in troops or providing healthcare workers. And in the eyes of a lot of the world, the US is seen as the leader of the free world. But as I mentioned, a lot of times US intervention isn't welcome. And some of the agendas they carry out in other nations that they intervene in are seen as hypocritical and don't really match the domestic values of the US. So yeah, and I want to talk specifically about US-Arab relations. So US-Arab relations are pretty fraught. And this is mostly, a lot of this has to do with the US stance on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The US is a big supporter of Israel. So the US might want to be more even-handed from a strategic perspective, but every country has domestic politics that shapes their foreign policy. So there are a lot of influential groups in the US that have supported Israel, and that's reflected in our foreign policy too. I also want to point out that our allies tend to be democracies. And another point is that generally people have a good feeling about Americans without necessarily liking the American government. So in other words, they like American culture. Foreign policy. So the US projects its power globally using soft and hard power. Some examples of hard power are when China acts up and they send their military ships through the Taiwan Strait. The US responds by sending an aircraft carrier to the region. Or if Iran is doing something the US doesn't like, the US might send aircraft carriers to the Gulf. And another example would be the US involvement in Afghanistan and Iraq. Some examples of soft power would be when the US limits the number of visas it hands out to certain countries depending on our relationship with them. So, if it's at a tense period and we're not exactly happy with the behavior of another country, we might limit the amount of visas we hand out. And there's one particular doctrine that I want to point out is the Monroe Doctrine. And this basically says that no other countries around the world, and it was intended at the time for Europe especially, but no other countries around the world can get involved in the Western Hemisphere. So the US kind of sees North and South America as their jurisdiction in a way. And any act to control some nation in North or South America is seen as a hostile act against the US. Okay, I want to talk about government systems now. So in the US, we have a system of separated powers. So in theory, Congress, the courts, and the presidents are co-equals. And the framers of the Constitution set up this system of checks and balances to prevent tyranny. Another key component of our government system is federalism. So a lot of power in the US is devolved to states. So the federal government can't get involved in, or is minimally involved in a lot of aspects of American life. So this is sort of true for education. Education is primarily a state and local responsibility. And then also there are certain laws that are unique to states, such as the death penalty. Each state has different rules for the death penalty and abortion, etc. Okay, power and authority. A lot of power is decentralized in the US. And the power I'm talking about here is similar to the soft power that the US exercises abroad. So this kind of power is like, it's spread out across the country. So for example, business in the US is generally centered in New York, but movies are centered in LA, government is centered in Washington. The South has a longstanding military tradition. So these sort of soft powers are spread out across the country. And in other nations, that's not necessarily the case. So France, for example, you might see in France, you might see the business is centered in Paris. The culture is centered in Paris. The government is centered in Paris. So in the US, it's spread out across the country. And another point I want to make is that in theory, Americans are highly individualistic and egalitarian. So no one should have, it's common belief that no one should have more expertise or authority. So this means that Americans don't always defer to elites. And a recent example of this is, during the pandemic, a lot of Americans didn't listen to the insistence, medical professionals' insistence for them to wear masks. But on the flip side, this means that elites are more responsive, and that for democracy to work, for people to feel empowered, this responsiveness is a healthy thing.
No.
Yeah, and just to go off of that, these are just some of the markets that some some of the jobs that the U.S. entails. Some of the industries that we kind of have here in the United States, and this isn't an exhaustive list. So, marketing, retail, administration, business. Transportation and agriculture. Again, there are more jobs that people have within the country, but these are some of the top ones. And then in terms of issues and challenges, people feel dissatisfied with their jobs. That concept has been around pretty much since jobs were created, and definitely, the idea of minimum wage and more so a living wage that isn't the same across the different states. Here in Massachusetts, it's $13.50, but I know in some places it's 15, in some places it's less. And the federal minimum wage hasn't changed since 2009. So there's that. Unemployment, which is money that the government gives to folks that aren't working, at least as of right now, because of the pandemic, the unemployment is giving folks more money than their jobs are, which leads me to say that their jobs aren't paying them enough, hence the need for a living wage. And, to be able to not just survive in the world, but thrive in it as well. So there's definitely that aspect of it. And, there are also those that prefer to work from home because of the pandemic, being able to stay in controlled environments that they have some sense of control over, and, that they don't have to interact with as many people in the office, like at their home, is, rather than if they were at the office. So. And then opportunities and strengths, in terms of where to go from here, there are people who are choosing to be entrepreneurs and, just wanting to be their own bosses, wanting to make their money without having to go to somebody else for that check, just trying to inject new ideas into the market and, make it on their own. And I would definitely argue that the market for entrepreneurship has grown over time, more so now than when it first started, and then arguably it'll grow even faster, in the next few coming years for sure. And there's definitely that willingness and that drive to kind of take those steps, to quit your job, to like put time, effort, energy, money into something that, won't necessarily happen or come to fruition overnight, but that, you know, once it's off the ground, say, hey, like I did it, like this something you can be proud of that was your own, you know, something for yourself and but also for your community. And you know, there's the growth of new ideas and you know the ability to do something not just for yourself and for your family, but for the community at large if you choose to do so. Or you know, or you could do it like I said, you know, just because you want to be your own person. You want to have the ability to make your own money without having to go to somebody. You want to just be your own boss, so to speak.
So the United States is often confused for a true free market economy whereby the government has incredibly limited control on its direction, which in some cases could be true, but as of right now, and as of probably for a few hundred years, this could not be further from the truth, as the US is a mixed economy, since the government often intervenes to ensure that the economy does not fail in any critical moments. And this would be through grants and taxation increases, decreases, and incentives to spend or to hold. So the grants could come in the form of like stimulus checks or any sort of like unemployment benefits that we were just speaking about. That is given through the government because that's their way of regulating the market in a way. So you know, inflation doesn't occur or any sort of anything of the sort. So there are several types of businesses in the United States, but since there are so many, it's best to just cover the types of ownership in general. So first, we have sole proprietorships, which are self-explanatory. It's a business or venture that's owned by just one person. Partnerships are like sole proprietorships, but two or more people share the responsibility. Corporations are a group of people who can legally act as a single person or a single entity, but they are separate to its owners. And S corporations are businesses that are given the regular benefits of incorporation while enjoying the tax-exempt privileges of a partnership. So here are the top 10 entrepreneurs and their businesses. So at first we have Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon. Bill Gates formerly owned Microsoft, and currently he owns several other businesses in all of his assets, but he's more well known for Microsoft. Warren Buffett is a very famous investor. He's known for genuinely just investing, to be honest, but obviously if you're going to be as famous as Warren Buffett and as rich as he is, you definitely have to have some sort of a holdings company, and that for him is Berkshire Hathaway. Mark Zuckerberg is the founder of Facebook. Sergey Brin is founder of Google. Phil Knight is founder of Nike. Rupert Murdoch is the owner of Wall Street Journal, Fox News, London Times, and several other news publications. Elon Musk, very famous guy right now. He started off with PayPal and kind of launched his SpaceX and Tesla businesses through that. And Carl Icahn owns Icahn Enterprises. Philip Anschutz owns Anschutz Entertainment Group, which is responsible for several hundred stadiums across the world.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the education system in the US. So American children can go to a public school, a private school, or be homeschooled, and that decision is usually up to their parents. And a private school usually costs money, and a public school is free when you pay taxes. So before elementary school, children often go to preschool and kindergarten, and that usually starts between age 3 or 4. American children begin elementary school at around age 6. Elementary school lasts from 1st grade till 5th grade. Then they go to middle school, and that's usually from 6th grade through 8th grade. And then high school, which is from 9th grade to 12th grade. After high school, students who choose to go to college can choose to go to a community college, a public college, or a private college. And UMass would be considered a public college. So tourism in the US, tourism is a major part of the US economy. Millions of tourists visit the US each year. And the US tourism industry generates over $1.5 trillion of economic output each year. Top tourism destinations include New York, Los Angeles, Orlando, Las Vegas, and Chicago. And the most well-known things in the US, Hollywood is obviously one of them, It's a neighborhood in Los Angeles that's well known for having many film studios there. Baseball is also a very well-known thing. It's a sport that originated in the mid-19th century and is often referred to as America's national pastime. The Grand Canyon is located in Arizona. It brings in over 5 million tourists per year, and that makes it one of the most popular sports spots in the US. American football originated in the mid-19th century and evolved from rugby and is currently the most popular sport in the US. Disney World is located in Florida